Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don. Welcome, everyone, to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on cybersecurity maturity model certification. My guest today is Dr. Merrick Watchorn of the Watchorn Innovation Group. I just want to let everyone know that we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the defense industrial base. Our focus primarily as a managed service provider, our focus is on organizations that are seeking certification. That's making up most of our audience here today. If you're in the audience and you have some questions during the session, please send those in during the, using the Q&A window within Zoom, and I will work in as many of the questions as we get today as possible in the 30 minutes that we have. So please send those in. Before I introduce my guest today, I want to take a quick moment to discuss some news in the world of CMMC. We took a break for the Labor Day holiday, so it's been a couple of weeks since our last session. In that time, the CMMC accreditation body has started to conduct assessor training, so they've completed the first assessor training class. There are now some actual certified assessors, provisionally certified assessors. I believe 20 have completed the training and are certified under that provisional program, and then there's more scheduled to be trained this month. So that's exciting news. This first class is going to be performing assessments under the Pathfinder program. My understanding is that these will all be level 1 assessments, and that these will initially be provisional in the sense that the assessment results that are completed will be provisional pending release of the final DFARS ruling that implements CMMC. So we're going to expect to see more assessors and the start of some commercially available assessments at levels above level 1 in the 2021 timeframe. CMMC accreditation body has also announced 11 licensed partner publishers. These are companies who are authorized to create training curriculum for CMMC, and they're going to be allowed to begin that curriculum development as soon as the DoD assessment guide is published. So this is going to greatly expand the capacity with respect to training certified professionals and certified assessors. So again, very exciting to see progress in the world of CMMC in terms of the process of actually getting folks certified. We still have not seen the draft DFARS clause, although the word is that it should be out for public review fairly soon. Although again, we've been hearing that now for a pretty good while. So I think that any day now still applies. And also looking forward to seeing some of the training materials. Obviously, we've seen the training materials have been released to the trainees under the provisional program. So we're going to keep an eye out for those. And once we see some of that, have some feedback from that, we'll present that here on one of these town hall sessions. So I want to introduce my guest today, Dr. Merrick Watchorn. Merrick has a long background in cyber and cloud security related research within the defense contractor space. He's worked for Mantech, SAIC, and others. He's currently CEO of the Watchorn Innovation Group and focusing on cyber awareness and resiliency specifically. He's the inventor of a high fidelity cybersecurity analysis tool called the Cyber Exome Ancestry Tool, or CEAT. Today we're going to take a look at this tool and the research work that Dr. Watchorn has done around it, and its application to designing high quality compliant security solutions. So specifically trying to tie that back to the challenges that we all have in terms of putting together compliant security programs to pass CMMC certification, potentially other frameworks that we may have to operate under. So Dr. Watchorn, thanks very much for joining us today. As with many regulations, it's easy to think of CMMC only in terms of the static requirements, checking the boxes. But CMMC is definitely more than a checklist. We've heard from the DoD, from Katie Arrington specifically, that the DoD views CMMC as intends it to be more than a checklist. So the intent is for defense industrial-based members to make smart security decisions, right? Raise the bar in terms of the effectiveness of their security program. So today, I want to take a look at what you've done as an approach to baking security in. So,
yeah, so thank you for letting me be here
Yeah.
today. So I think you had another follow-up question. I stepped on you. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. Yeah, thanks for being here. So before we get into the tool specifically, I want to kind of think about that baked-in concept. CMMC is really focused on results, right? The ability of a contractor to defend against state-sponsored adversaries. At a high level, it seems that baking security in would be more effective than bolting it on as an afterthought. Like, we all kind of agree that that's a good concept. Take us a little deeper. What does it take to bake security in, and what are some of the benefits of doing it that way versus some of the other alternatives?
Absolutely. So when we talk about baked-in security, this is actually it was in its day in 2013, 2012, an advanced research concept. This means understanding every facet, nuance, and aspect of a security ecosystem, and understanding the concept of anti-fragility, which is the more things you add to an environment, the less stable that an environment is. This has been supported, if you will, by baked-in security concepts by the development of the Cybersecurity Workforce Framework from the Department of Defense with the NICE organization and sponsored by NIST. The implementation of the Cybersecurity Framework. One of the things that I would say from a baked-in security standpoint is, imagine taking all those things that I just mentioned and realize that they're all interrelated to each other. And so when we get down to the very bare nugget of what we're talking about here is, do you as an individual who is responsible understand the requirement to meet the objective of the security control across a large spectrum of ecosystems? So we have ISO standards, we have the CMMC, we have NIST standards, we have all these different things, but all of these standards, if you boil away all that, you get back to the NIST 853 series and the assessment modalities associated with it. You can begin to see that all of these standards, whether it be SANS, it be the DHS TIC, they all are back to the 853 control sets. So AC1, which is access control policy, do you understand that there's 176 different ways that access control policy not properly written can compromise your system? And that compromise of your system, how does it interrelate across the entire ecosystem? So the SEAT tool maps and structures what we call a semantic ontology to track things across an entire lineage of the instantiation of a given security control, all the different perspectives of where that control has been selected or mutated or guidance is provided, any supplemental enhancements that have been done by any federal organization. And it says, before you make a decision about this control, here's all the things you should know. And the intent is, it goes back to that cyber awareness and resiliency. The more aware you are of the cyber issue, the more resilient you can design the system. And so the SEAT tool strives to put what we call the meat on the bones to help people understand how do you get there. And so baked-in security is a holistic approach. You've heard stuff like zero trust architecture, zero trust modality.
Excuse me, let me interrupt you real quick.
With it. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, we're having some comments that it's hard to hear you. Can you get a little closer to the mic or maybe increase volume a little bit?
Sure. How's that? Is that better?
That's much better. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Big improvement. Thanks.
So to kind of hit the top, baked-in security is the holistic understanding of every nuance of cybersecurity ethos, designs, and oversight. Now, as a cyber practitioner, I will say this: a compliance assessment is the test on the security that we designed into the system, if that makes sense to everybody online. So I want to make sure we understand each other. This tool is not going to come in and do any automated assessments for you. It's going to help you during the design phase to make sure that you don't inherently incorporate security flaws into your overall design. And so it's cheaper to do it this way than do it as Ed was just talking about, bolting on security one piece at a time, one piece at a time, one piece at a time. And a good specific point is, think about all the work that was done with Cloudera in 2006 through 2011. And when it was finally delivered for the folks that wanted to use it, that's when all the security designs were created, was after the tool had already been built. All the security flaws were already incorporated into it. Some of the phenomenal ways that you could break a Hadoop cluster is by attacking a single name node, and that would bring down the whole system. So in my world, we would never design or allow to design a system that has a single point of failure. It's just not something we would ever allow. But that's because the requirement for that was not part of that design phase. So with that, I'll kind of pause and give you a second to think about that one, sir.
So you mentioned situational awareness, and I think the tool seems to be, as I look at it, seems to be about understanding some of the hidden relationships between controls and the relationships between those controls and the features that you're designing in. Can you give a little bit of background on kind of why you developed it? Like, what is the problem that you set out to solve when you started work on this tool?
So back when this tool was first conceivably designed, we were trying to understand how a cloud system could be compromised. How difficult was it to compromise a cloud system? Once we got done doing that particular aspect of understanding of the nuance of the ISO stack or the security control modality stack, we began to discover that once we broke it down to the control plane level, we actually had discovered a brand new hidden relationship diagram that we had never understood. So for example, it is a discovery as a byproduct. There are 201 security controls inside the NIST catalog that if you fail to comply with them, have legal regulatory compliance. That means you have violated the law. Now, I will say this, that it used to be that you'd probably get a slap on the wrist. You'd be asked by your government contractor, or you'd be asked by someone to say, you know, hey, don't do that again. Could you please fix it? We'll fix this. We promise, type thing. But some of that stuff has changed. With the first 60 years of security clearances and security cleared personnel, we have only had about 11 publicly acknowledged, and I will say that with a caveat, individuals that compromised national security in 50 years. And so if we look from 1945 to about 2000, it was only about 11 people, and they're very well documented by both the FBI and other individuals. If we take a deep breath and we look from 2000 to 2020, we've had 8. So if we're being absolutely fundamentally honest with what we're seeing here, without the baked in security, we cannot detect flaws in training. We cannot detect flaws in associative philosophy of how we're going to solve a design spectrum. We cannot make better security. In 2016, Dr. Ron Ross from NIST, who is the Joint Task Force leader, made a public statement saying that, you know, it's not working. We've been doing this and it's just not working. And the reason is that you can't protect that which you don't even understand. So imagine the first time it was presented, it was in 2013. 3 years later, when he was selected for that role, his primary focus was to go back and redesign and put cybersecurity awareness in every aspect of the NIST modality. So if you take a look at the total amount of security products issued by NIST from 2000 to 2012, it's somewhere around the range of about 432 documents. If you take a look at it post 2013, including the original 432 that they've issued another 300 on top of that. And some of these are being replaced as they upgrade, and we're now seeing the integration of the MITRE ATT&CK framework into the NIST architecture. We're starting to see how the National Vulnerability Database is being cross-indexed with the OSCL system. All of these things are because they're trying to get that situational awareness. We have insider threat program requirements inside the CMMC. We have advanced persistent threat detection modalities. Well, believe it or not, prior to 2015, that was the exclusive ownership of the CNSI 1253 document that's published inside the intelligence community. So we see even that material information transforming from there to protect the ecosystem. And the reason is the adversaries against the United States changed their fundamental policy. Again, if we go back and we realize there was 11 known prior and then 8 recently, it's very difficult in certain instances to compromise individuals that work in certain roles. They're usually believers or they're former military service members. The easier way is to go in there and put bad materials or fake microchips or things of that nature to compromise the supply chain. And because we've been so good as a country of not having these problems in the past, it made it very easy for foreign adversaries to intersect bad products into our supply chain. And of course, I'm not here to point fingers at anyone. I think that would be counterproductive. It's to say that this is publicly known information, and this is information that anyone spending 15 minutes of time looking at this topic will find these answers to these questions. So we don't have to waste our time with that, Ed.
No, it's been pretty well documented, and I think even people who have some issues with CMMC as a program agree that, you know, the adversaries are way too successful in executing some of these attacks against us, and we need to raise the bar. So try to bring this to sort of practical application of the SEAT tool. So for companies that are seeking certification under CMMC, those companies, that's primarily our audience today, those companies need to make smart choices in terms of the system design, the systems that they're going to take forward for an assessment and say, this meets the standard, right? they need to put together this sort of interoperating mesh of practices. They have to address all the CMMC requirements. The rule is we can't miss any. So that takes us to sort of the checklist idea, right? We also need those solutions to be effective, efficient, reliable, adaptable, all those things. They actually have to work at stopping the threat. We have to be able to afford to keep them running. We have to have them, stay in place over time. So those goals, the checklist approach doesn't get us there. So the checklist can help us to make sure we don't miss anything, that we've got a design that has checked all the boxes, but none of those other design goals. So how does SEAT help to do the design job better, to bake security in a way that we end up with not just checking the boxes, but also efficient, reliable, adaptable, all those things that are important to us?
Absolutely. So one of the things that the SEAT tool does is that because of the way the ontology is designed, it knows what we call the interconnectivity, the DNA, if you will, of a cybersecurity control. If we were to just use the CMC as a perfect example, and we take a look at the most common, easily understood, which is AC.1.001, which is a CMMC practice, we find out that the description is to limit information system access to unauthorized users, processes, and acting on behalf. And we find what the NIST criteria is made out of the 171 and the 172. And then we find what the CMMC is proposing that should be done in order to meet that. So imagine those are not two conflicting, but in many instances, two conflicting dioramas of approach on how we have to look at this problem. Where my tool would come in is that if we take a look at the references that were created by the CMC v.102, we find out that they're mapping this to FAR clause 52.204-21B1I. That's actually the paragraph, in case everybody's wondering. I actually don't know this. I have this up on screen on my home computer. But it's mapped.
So not memorized.
No, not memorized. This is too much stuff to memorize, and I would tell anyone not to memorize the stuff. It's easier to document it. We also find out that this is mapped to the NIST SP 800-171 Rev 1, which is 3.1.1. It's also mapped to a series of SIS controls. It's mapped to a series of NIST cybersecurity framework controls. It's mapped to the CERT risk management modality, which has the CRR is what we call it. And then it's mapped to three specific NIST SP 853 controls, which is AC2, AC3, and AC17. And I believe it is also mapped to the Australian Essential 8, which is really cool, right? So that sounds like a very comprehensive way to solve this problem. Where the SEAT tool comes in, it comes back and it says, okay, that's true. I totally agree with you. However, you should be aware that because of the way the CMC is adopting a security control that comes from our good friends over there at NIST, you have laws and executive orders that you should be situationally aware of depending on the type of business that you're working in. So, for example, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Okay, doesn't apply to most people inside the DIB. I'll give that one away. Except you should be aware that after the CISA Act of 2015 was passed, that has a special ruling in that if a federal investigator or a duly authorized federal investigator discovers the commission of a crime while doing their assessment, they're required by federal law to report it. So just think about for a minute that this is not anyone knowing that, there is a wonderful little scam that's going on where they're taking corporate servers over and they're hosting porn sites on it. So imagine here you are, you're a corporate good vendor, you've been doing everything you're supposed to be doing. You have a SOC, you've done all stuff, but somebody has figured out how to put material on your computer systems. It's a federal crime. You just lost your CMC accreditation. Now that's not a far out of the loop, but believe it or not, it's happened 3 times so far. It has nothing to do with CMMC. This is organizations that someone found child pornography on a worker's laptop. It was not detected by the design systems, and so thus so far the government was able to say, we can't do business with you anymore. You're committing federal crimes. So if we take it further and we take a look at what's called the Cyber-Related Sanctions regulation, which is also related to this control set, we find out, oh my gosh, if the government believes that you've done something that's aided or abetted or assisted or could have caused harm to the United States, you've violated the IRS cause for having your accounts frozen. So this is what the SEAT tool is doing behind the scenes. It's looking for what do we know and what don't we know. Well, let's imagine that the CMC person comes in and finds out that you're not protecting privacy the way you're supposed to be protecting privacy. Or you're operating in the state of California and they find out that you're not following the California Consumer Privacy Act because you're a consumer business and you're storing information inappropriately on a server, which compromises PII or PHI data, congratulations. The CMC auditor has a legal moral responsibility to report this to the Department of Homeland Security, which then remands it to the U.S. CERT for criminal investigation, turns it over to the FBI for further investigation. We can call it evidence collection, and then the forensic investigation is the U.S. CERT's responsibility in the CISA Act. The FBI investigates you, remands charges to the DOD, and then the government claims that your organization has committed fraud. Now, let's be clear. I will sit there and say that there's a lot of cyber lawyers that will tell you that that is a worst case scenario, except that we've had 8 cases in 2020 where that worst case scenario ended up being exactly the outcome. Capital One had an $80 million fine, and that's just its first in a series of fines that is more allegedly going to be paying for the data breach that occurred in 2018. So kinetic issues that we used to not associate with cyber changed after Stuxnet. And cyber was declared a weapons system by the Department of Defense, and this is why you're seeing these kinds of behaviors. We have to protect weapons systems with the highest level of integrity. So that's kind of stuff that we're doing here. For example, although the CMC folks are doing a phenomenal job, I'm sure they're not aware that they also ran afoul of the OMB A130, which is the Office of Management and Budget. OMB decides how contractors shall subscribe to protecting information when in contact with other federal agencies. And if you violate an OMB clause, you by definition will violate a CMC clause, if that makes sense to everybody. And so these are all little things you have to kind of keep in the back of your head. For anyone who's interested, you've also run afoul of the current version of the Trusted Interconnect Connection, or the TIC from the DHS, which means TSRA-001. So imagine how all this information in front of you as a chief information security officer or a solutions architect, and you've been asked to design a system that has to withstand a state-sponsored attack. Having this information at your fingertips allows you to make the most informed decision, and that's what the SEAT tool strives to help out with.
That's cool. So seeing what those connections are. TIC, by the way, I think there's a new version. I saw something this morning. There may be a new version of that just
3.0 has been alleged to come out on the street for the better part of the last 9 months. I know that they're doing a lot of upgrade and alignment from the U.S. CERT to the DHS requirements to meet the CISA 2015 federal laws. I believe there's even elements that tie into the DoD SRG, which, depending on who you talk to, will go away. But you know, hey, I'm not here to mince words. To me, they're just requirements, and I track them to make sure that we don't make any mistakes when I make suggestions to clients.
So looking back at the sort of the origins of CMMC, for me, when I trace that back, I get back to the MITRE report, Deliver Uncompromised, and that was really the spark that started a lot of this. So one of the things in that report, so quick plug, if anybody hasn't read it, it's about 2 years old now, but still very relevant information. It ties to a lot of things that Merrick was just talking about in terms of, you know, how is the threat being successful, and why are the things we're doing to deter it not working. So anyway, MITRE report, Deliver Uncompromised, got CMMC started. It has a recommendation in there, one of many really good recommendations for a risk score along the lines of a credit score that we use in a consumer and business-to-business credit. So SEAT produces somewhat of a scoring or percentage from what I've seen. How does that notion of scoring come into play? So if you're looking at, say, one product, you know, vendor product versus another, scoring, it may help you choose one of those. Does it also have applicability to sort of the entire solution, say maybe scoring a company's entire cybersecurity posture? Because again, that's what was sort of recommended by MITRE in that report. CMMC doesn't really have a notion of scoring. It's a pass-fail, if you will, at each of the levels. So does the SEAT a tool that could be used to kind of score where you are?
So imagine, if you will, the tool has the capacity right now as we're talking to score you on 1,500 different security known baselines instantaneously. So let's say that a product were to come in the door and they were trying to convince me to select their product to put it inside my architecture. We'll just go ahead and put this into practical terms. I would ask for their SSP. I would ask for their security control assessment log. I would want to know how they were done their assessment, right? So I often hear people confuse CMMC with FedRAMP. right? So I hear these stories a lot. So I probably should be very forthwith in saying you're talking to the developer of the first iteration of the FedRAMP High baseline and the redevelopment of it in 2015. Now, I was part of a group. I led the FedRAMP High baseline to figure out how we could actually add the control sets in a way that made sense and logical, what we called on shared responsibility models. In 2015, I wrote an article for the US Cybersecurity magazine called The Inheritable Cloud Security Model, which is where some of the stuff that we're talking about today actually finds its origins. But if you think about that for a minute, if you knew what baseline you were trying to hit, let's say that you're worried about privacy. Well, if you are selecting a security control, you may not know that that control is associated with privacy, but the SEAT tool does. So if you select it, you'll get an increase in your potential compliance score. But say you don't add it, well, guess what? Your score's not going to go up. A case in point is that there was a security product that was brought to my attention, and we were asked to look at the tool to figure out why we couldn't, as a strategic partner, sell this product. It was a very difficult problem for us. So we sat down with the vendor, we collected all the evidence, and we came back, we used the tool to document the outcomes, and we found out that the product that we were going around trying to sell only actually mitigated 9 security controls out of the NIST 853 Rev 4. So for all the folks on the phone, at the end of the day, the most difficult problem that the US government has, as well as industry, is there's a finite amount of budget for how much money could be spent on cybersecurity. So if we're going to spend money, should we spend it on things that we cannot or have no idea how we're going to resolve because this tool is the silver bullet that's going to close a gap or move it? The tool will detect in many instances where a specific security product shares the same security control baseline. Now imagine if you were trying to figure out which tool was the better of the two, and their same control set, they do the exact same control set, but one actually solves your operational needs and the other one actually solves your managerial needs, and this other one is actually the one that solves your technical needs. Well, how much overlap occurred between those 3 tools? So if I spend $125,000 per year in order to get access to tool 1, $175,000 for tool 2, and then I spend $375,000 for tool 3, I'm over $500,000 in operational cost that has nothing to do with how much the storage is going to cost, how much the SOC is going to have to spend, maintenance and development cycles. Okay, that's $1 million in CISO terms. If you could take tool 1 and tool 3, drop tool 2 because there's redundancy between the other 2 tools, you don't need the other tool, you've now saved money. So you can then take that money, reallocate it into your return off your investment to go and seek out another tool to close a gap that you can't figure out how to solve. And so that's one of the main purposes of what I was documenting. And so right now we have over 500 security products. I already have a list of all the products that will help you out with CMMC based on levels. And believe it or not, it's not me saying that the product is going to meet your specific needs. It's not saying that it's going to meet the CMC criteria. What it says is that this product has controls that are part of the CMC baseline as part of that vendor product. So when you sit down with the product, you can sit down and your CISO can create what we call a graduated scorecard on all the different things that he has to worry about, or she, pardon me, and you would plug that into the tool and you would start selecting the products, and it will start telling you how long you are in the max compliance score that you have given the complexity of your system. The tool also can write what's called an automated assessment modality model, where it will take what you've created and it will actually write out a document for you to tell you these are all the controls that are associated with this specific service. And so if that product doesn't meet that service boundary requirement, congratulations, it doesn't meet the criteria for selection into your environment. Is the same applied thing to CMMC. Hopefully that helps out. So again,
great, thanks.
Instantaneous, we do FIPS and FISMA compliance scoring on the fly for every one of the decision points you make. When we look at a tool, we look at whether it's operational, management, or technical. We also look at it from, is it a critical product? So remember when I talked about the 201 security controls that are critical? What's your critical score? So we call this the cyber order of operations and methodology. It's a math-based scientific approach of trying to do sample setting to figure out where the product actually has its strongest. Because of the way that the controls are selected, we can actually tell you what ecospace the product could be used in as well. So we're very excited about what we're doing so far, and that's kind of the direction we're going. And so it's instantaneous.
That's some good info, and we're kind of near the end of our time, so I need to ask kind of a wrap-up question. This is good for, I think, the folks who are trying to do more than just check the boxes on the checklist, right? Who are trying to design their systems, design their solutions in an intelligent way, and I think that's true for product vendors trying to bring things to market. It's true for solution designers that are trying to put together all of what they need to do to comply with CMMC, other frameworks, and make sure they've done that in a smart way, and that they've seen these hidden connections that you're talking about. So to wrap up, I want to ask you kind of a closing question. So you're an observer and an influencer. You mentioned your work on FedRAMP, so you're working on a broad range of cybersecurity regulation and standards in terms of having thoughts about the right way to do it. I'm sure you have some suggestions for CMMC as it evolves. So the team that's developing it, they're working really hard and they're moving really fast under a lot of scrutiny. There's been a lot of listening going on. They've done a great job of taking feedback from a lot of different places. So one of the questions I like to ask on this series is, what's your number one advice to those folks that are heads down working on CMMC as they move from this published standard into actual practice? What's your number one advice for them?
So this is gonna. So I'm gonna climb on that soapbox, Ed, but I'm gonna come at it from a different perspective so that we can all have a good laugh, right? So just remember that CMMC is the basics of what you should be doing. I would go and start my CMC program at my organization in a totally organic way. And I'm just going to say this so that everybody can understand where I'm going with this. The first thing I would do is I would go and make sure that I understood all the insider threat security controls that have been defined by the CNSI 1253. I would also make sure that I understand all the APT controls that are assigned by the CNSI 1253. In many instances, these controls will show up inside the CMMC. So when you create your control baseline, start with those two documents that will help you get your starting point so you can understand a couple different things. First, some of these controls are not well accessible. So you have to think of neuralistic ways of solving that problem. In management controls, you have to understand, how do I prove from a technical and operational standpoint what controls prove that I did the management implementation, and so on and so forth. So when you sit down and you think about your approach, start at the basic. Go back and say, okay, my organization has one slice that mandates to the CMMC. Hopefully this makes sense to everybody. But we know for a fact that there's so many things that have to meet all kinds of compliance standards, all kinds of requirements. So by understanding how all these things tie in together, you can begin to create yourself almost like a mind map of what things need to be connected in order to make sure that you don't run afoul of a CMMC. When you walk into the CMC and you hand them what it is that you believe you do, when you go above and beyond what the CMC is looking for, you've met the actual intent of the CMMC. Okay, so when I attended the first CMMC planning meetings back in 2017, there was a discussion about, we're looking for bad actors. And if you can't do the CMMC the way that we're articulating it to you, you're exactly the bad actor we don't want to work with. And so I would just end this on the following. Please remember that you're working in the Department of Defense for national security. And such forth, you need to understand that you either knowingly, unknowingly, willingly, or unwillingly compromise national security is a federal offense, and it is a felony. If you take time to go take a look at the Department of Justice, it's anywhere from 1 to 25 years in federal prison and multiple thousands and thousands of dollars of fines. In the past, the Defense Industrial Base has done its level-headed best to try to keep up with what the government needs and what industry is doing. And so best practices were created and everybody's trying to do the right things. And I will just quote one of my favorite persons from the 10th Mountain Rangers. When I pull out the 9mm to go to work, it had better work exactly the way that was told me to, because all of the theoretical work is over with. Go back to the fact that the DoD has declared cyber to be a weapon system, and you can begin to see how they have matured in their thought process on this. We have the Cybersecurity Workforce Framework. We have Cyber Resilience and Engineering out of NIST. We have DoD Supply Chain Risk Management. I'm personally working on the first ever cyber forensic criminal investigation. The Defense Acquisition University is designing a training program to train the government personnel on how to implement the CMMC as it pertains to the DoD. And if it was me, the National Defense University should create a master's degree in the CMMC so that it can start taking its DoD senior echelons and start teaching them the ethics. But all of this comes back to cyber awareness and resiliency. And I stress to everybody that if you read a good cyber book, that's great. If you read a great cyber article and it gives you a moment to think about it, then you should share it with your community, because that's how we get better as a whole. So with that, I'll pause that and say thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Well, thank you. That's really good information. I think, our audience skews towards the early adopters, right? These are the people who are taking CMMC and cybersecurity seriously, or they wouldn't be here listening. They'd be off waiting for it to go away and hoping it doesn't ever come to them. And so I think, these are folks that are, like I say, by self-selection, are taking it seriously and take the concept that we are defending our nation, our national security against some adversaries, and we all play a part in that. So I appreciate your insights there. I did have a question come in from the audience about recordings of these. So I do want to mention that all the recordings of our town hall sessions are available on our website. So NeoSystemsCorp.com has the back catalog of these sessions. So you can, if you missed this one or you have colleagues you'd like to recommend to see it, feel free to direct them there. We are doing these, let's see, the next session is going to be Wednesday, September 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern. Will be the next town hall. And also please mark your calendars, because we're going to have a fireside chat with Katie Arrington one-on-one, and that's going to be Monday, September 21st. So next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. That was rescheduled from this Monday due to some urgent Department of Defense business that Ms. Arrington had to take care of. So we're happy to welcome her, and we're going to be diving deep into CMMC and the achievability of that, right? How do we make CMMC achievable for all the members of the DoD Defense Industrial Base? So thanks for your attention and time. Dr. Watchorn, thanks for joining me today. Audience, thanks for your attention, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.